Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. One of the things we in BC Seeds and our organizing committee really angst about a lot was how are we going to introduce the issue of GE, or GMOs. We know it's really critical to us as organic farmers. We're not sure which way to go with it. It carries for us a lot of fear. We know that sometimes when we get around a circle and we start talking about GMOs and how they might threaten us as organic growers, it tends to hijack, the meeting or the workshop or whatever it is, and we don't want to leave it out, but neither do we want it to be the only thing we talk about, and it certainly hasn't been. But it is really important and critical, and we are really lucky that Lucy is here with us today. We could never have afforded to bring her ourselves, but she just happened to serendipitously be on a tour of BC and in our very own territory, where she had a talk in Langley on Thursday, and some people went to that. And she's going to come here. She is the coordinator of the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network, known to all of us as CBAN. She's been CBAN's been a champion for many years. They're a coalition of 18 organizations, including farmers associations, environmental groups, and international development organizations. Lucy coordinated the international ban on Terminator campaign in 2005 and 2006. Hooray on that! And previously worked as a campaigner and researcher on this issue with the Sierra Club of Canada and the Polaris Institute. So she's here to talk to us about GMOs and hopefully to point us in a direction on how we might get involved in the action that CBAN is taking. Lucy Sharratt.
Thanks so much, Heather, and it's super to be here. Thanks so much. While you eat your lunch, we can have a discussion about this issue. And I titled the talk, British Columbia Can Stop Genetic Engineering, because it's actually a really important time on this issue, and it lands right here in British Columbia, and I'll describe a little bit about that. But there's a really important role that consumers and farmers in British Columbia can play right now, a very politically important role. So as Heather said, this issue of genetic engineering can be really overwhelming, and when we find out that there's yet another proposal for a genetically engineered crop, the reaction can look a little bit like this. This is our new mascot bee and the dairy cow discovering genetically engineered alfalfa. And I'll use both terms, genetic engineering and genetic modification. They mean the same thing, which of course is this crossing of genes from one species to another, this lab technology. I'm going to assume that you all have background of some kind in this issue, have a problem with genetic engineering, and are interested in taking action. So our initial reaction can turn to panic. This is our little bee discovering the role and extent of alfalfa in the food system. That alfalfa is, as you know, more than just sprouts and sandwiches. It is high-protein feed for dairy cows and livestock. It's important pasture, hay, and it's also important for building the soil for grain and vegetable farmers. So when we think about genetically engineered alfalfa, in this case Monsanto's Roundup Ready herbicide-tolerant alfalfa, which has been approved but is not legally yet on the market in Canada, the extent of the damage that this crop would do, pollinated by bees, the first perennial GM crop that could be introduced, that's what it can look like. But luckily, the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network does exist, and it exists to make your ability to take action on this issue easier. We are an extensive network of organizations. Many of you may be members of some of these organizations that are members of CBAN. So it includes the Canadian Organic Growers, the Society for GE-Free BC, which is a coalition of grassroots community groups. And so the membership is also really diverse. So there's farmer organizations, community groups, and international development groups and environmental groups with expertise and experience on the campaigns going back 15 years or more. And I know many of you around the room have participated in these campaigns for a long time, if not longer than that time. And so we do have some resources, we do have some capacity to bring to this issue, and that's why it's great to have the opportunity to introduce CBAN to you and the campaigns, so that we can move to a place of evaluating, analyzing the issue, and strategizing. CBAN provides, or our goal is to provide you with information that you can use and strategic opportunities, so that when you take action, it's as strategic as we can hope to take on. That we are analyzing the opportunities and giving you the opportunity in your busy lives to participate in a campaign with, as Heather says, without allowing it to hijack your other work in seed saving or however it is that you're working to build a better food system. And so CBAN also is really happy to build new alliances outside of the membership of our groups as well, across the country. So I think it's really important that we actually review where genetic engineering is, because this experiment of 17 years looks pretty poor in terms of what it's produced. Certainly the list of crops that are grown around the world, this is it. It's 7 crops. And in Canada we just grow genetically engineered corn, canola, soy, and white sugar beet. Of course, this is in a lot of processed food ingredients, and certainly corn is a challenge for organic growers, and genetically engineered canola has already sort of wiped out organic canola for the most part across Canada. So there's a consequence to this 7, but this is the limited suite of technologies. It's herbicide tolerant and insect resistant of these 7. The papaya and squash are really minimally grown, and they're mostly grown in the United States. And I think it's really important that we remember all of those genetically engineered crops that are not on the market thanks to consumer and farmer resistance. Starting from Monsanto's bovine growth hormone, which was supposed to be the first genetically engineered crop, the first genetically engineered product from Monsanto, this veterinary drug designed to enhance milk production. And Canadians also stopped GM wheat and GM potatoes, Terminator seeds with farmers across the world. And just this year, the genetically engineered pig from the University of Guelph, misnamed in Barho pig. So the stakes are really high. I know that you understand that, and there's different ways that we can talk about what those stakes are. But I wanted to introduce 3 pending approvals for genetically engineered products. And one is the genetically engineered Atlantic salmon, engineered to grow twice as fast. And of course the stakes with that really, it's not an overestimation to say that the future of wild Atlantic salmon is at stake with this type of contamination that would happen, escapes from fish farms. This picture is the view from across the road from Aqua Bounty's research and development facility in Bay Fortune, Prince Edward Island. Aqua Bounty is a very small US company that wants to introduce Atlantic salmon. And so this is a really serious issue. We work with our US colleagues. This is Eric Hoffman from Friends of the Earth United States. And him and a colleague from the Center for Food Safety in the US, we toured Atlantic Canada speaking about this issue, because the company Aqua Bounty wants to grow their GM Atlantic salmon eggs in Prince Edward Island and ship them to Panama for growing out and processing, ship the eggs to Panama, and send the fish, the processed fish, to the US consumer market. So they've done this ring around environmental assessment. But if we look closer in terms of what actually we're up against, this is Aqua Bounty's mailbox. So who is this company that we have this regulatory system that allows any gaggle of entrepreneurs that have enough money and enough science to ask Health Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, or in this case Environment Canada, not that we we get any information about the status of this application. But this is a small, dinky operation, not to be trusted certainly with a genetically engineered organism that can multiply and escape. But I think we should know that not every product is coming from Monsanto, and we've already defeated a number of Monsanto's main and important genetically engineered products. So we can stop genetic engineering. We can certainly stop these more bizarre and crazy experiments like a genetically engineered fish. Because this is really, you know, we can still have fun. This is still the way that we work, is putting the humanity back in this terrific fight. And I wanted to draw the parallel between the Atlantic salmon, which of course has resonance here in British Columbia, with another product, this genetically modified apple that's being proposed, because it's another small company that wants to introduce this non-browning apple. So an apple that you can slice and it won't brown for 15 to 18 days, according to the company. Yeah, so the reaction in the room is, that's ridiculous. And that's the same reaction from all consumers, and it's the same reaction from actually the entire chain inside the apple industry. That includes the BC fruit growers, organic growers of course, but also the US Apple Association and the largest manufacturer of sliced apples, Crunch Pack. So nobody wants this technology, and yet there's no gatekeeper in Canada to stop it. It's actually literally irrelevant in Canadian regulation as to whether or not farmers want a technology. If it'll destroy organic apples, that's not a consideration the regulation takes into account. If it'll destroy our export or domestic markets for apples, that's also irrelevant. It's politically important, it's politically relevant, but that's our job, is to make it politically relevant. If the apple is deemed to be safe to eat and safe to grow, it'll be approved, even if it'll destroy apple production or the apple markets. And this is important because there's action you can take in British Columbia that will have impact, because there's consensus between organic and conventional growers that the apple is not wanted, and there's already strong statements from organizations like the BC Fruit Growers Association. So I have a petition with me. There are local groups in the Okanagan who've launched a petition asking the provincial government to take action. And that's really important because we know the federal government is very supportive of genetic engineering and needs to hear from a new place like the provincial government, which has an interest, or should, in protecting BC growers. And we'll be working with groups across British Columbia in 2013 to make sure that there's some actions that are happening that you can participate in that will really make a big difference. So what can we do? Well, apparently you can hold a megaphone and your grandson. This is from just a few weeks ago, October 24th in Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario, outside an industry meeting planning for the coexistence of GM alfalfa and every other alfalfa. The Canadian Seed Trade Association is planning, like literally, we will devise a plan for coexistence, because prairie farmers have already rejected GM alfalfa. It will destroy the largest export. We are the largest exporter of dehydrated alfalfa products in the world. And this is obviously politically important. So maybe we could introduce GM alfalfa in Ontario. This is Monsanto's technology that would be introduced by Forage Genetics International. And obviously, everyone knows coexistence won't work. This is a myth, it's impossible. Contamination is what will happen here. And small children understand this. Every farmer understands this. If you're not already a member of the National Farmers Union and you're interested, I would encourage you to do so. The National Farmers Union is leading this campaign against GM alfalfa with CBAN. They are a member of CBAN. And I think the issue in alfalfa, the issue of alfalfa in BC is very important because alfalfa is grown, and ranchers and people who have horses rely on alfalfa. And so every part of the country is affected by GM alfalfa. in addition to the fact that, organic dairy would disappear, for example, and other products on the shelves would be affected. We need to understand the issue of alfalfa, and though it's a little bit more complex than apple, we can communicate with consumers about it, which is fantastic, because this is part of the long movement building and bringing urban people or non-farming people along to understanding how food is produced. This banner, Citizens Say No GM Contamination, was made at the Big Carrot grocery store, natural health food store in Toronto. And we organized the protest with a week's notice. 120 farmers showed up at Kitchener-Waterloo, and this banner was a part of it. And the customers at the Big Carrot signed the banner. And so I think, the opportunity is there, especially when farmers lead by, calling for action. Consumers are there behind you. And certainly you're not alone. So I invite you to take action with us. We have action postcards here on alfalfa that are designed for your Member of Parliament. There's a blank space there for you to add your Member of Parliament in. I have multiple copies if you have an opportunity to take them home. I also have a postcard that has a list of the GM crops approved in the world, the foods on the market, and people find this extremely helpful. So if you have a farm stand, or there's a local store, or a place where you interact with customers, consumers, then feel free to take a bundle of those. I also have, while I'm here, I have some copies of this publication, which is really helpful if you're looking for some background on genetic engineering and some good references about the science, but also some of the issues around pesticide use and others. We have it for sale for $10, just to provide you with another resource. Thanks. So I think there's time. Did you want questions or comments?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Lucy, what about that question that I asked you earlier here? John referred to this about whether or not genetically modified alfalfa and soybeans are not nitrogen.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard that. I don't know if there's clarity on that. I haven't heard that there's a nitrogen fixing issue with soy or GM alfalfa, and certainly with the GM alfalfa, that would be number 15 on the list of problems with GM alfalfa. So I think the problem here, of course, as you can see, is that GM contamination will happen. Alfalfa makes that point really clearly, which is helpful. If we can stop GM alfalfa, we'll do so because politicians, consumers understand this issue of GM contamination. And that will be how we protect the future of organics.
Is GM alfalfa already in the United States?
So the question was if GM alfalfa is already in the United States, and yes, in 2011, after many years of legal fights, plantings of GM alfalfa were allowed. And in Canada, GM alfalfa was approved for human health safety and for environmental release in 2005. But there's one more regulatory step which has nothing to do with genetic engineering that's kept it off the market for the moment, which that could change in a year or so. But what that means practically too is that GM alfalfa contamination from the States is not illegal, it's not a safety issue, the government doesn't care about it.
In my community in the Cowichan Valley, I've been asking feed stores, where is the alfalfa coming from? And I let them know that it's because I don't want US alfalfa, because the stat I heard was 50% is potentially genetically modified at this point. So I think it's important to let those kind of people know too, like their customers are asking for alfalfa that isn't contaminated so that they're aware of the issues as well. They didn't know at all. That was news to them, even though they sell it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thanks, that's really important. So the point was raised that we can ask at feed stores where the alfalfa is coming from. And it's true that in BC, a lot of people are buying US alfalfa, and that's a serious issue, and it's obviously a route to contamination. And yeah, so that is definitely another way that BC could stop GM alfalfa. because certainly we do need to keep an eye on the border issue. Yeah, because BC could be one of the first places for contamination because of exactly this. Yeah, yeah, that's a great immediate action. That's super.
My question was more back around Proposition 37 and what I know there was a lot of local groups that were working against that campaign. And I was just wondering if you had any comments around its defeat, even though it was close, and what the next steps are or strategies that, what's next or what to follow from that.
Thanks. So the question was around what's called Proposition 37, which was on election night in the US. In addition to Obama being elected, Californians had the opportunity to vote on a ballot that included a question for the mandatory labeling of genetic engineering, because there's this whole referendum system in California. And that vote was defeated by a small margin. 47% of Californians voted for mandatory labeling and 53% against. And that was after $46 million was spent by food and biotech companies. Yeah, and this is a common experience. Canadians experienced the same issue when we ran a 3-year-long intensive campaign for mandatory labeling that ended in 2001 with a defeat in the House of Commons. After 120,000 people had signed a petition and 3 years worth of really strong grassroots mobilization, big money just built that wall. And so we see that there's obviously momentum and new people are coming into the issue of genetic engineering at this point, which is amazing. I would say that we have a political opportunity to stop genetic engineering, and actually that's far more possible than mandatory labeling. And from a farmer's perspective, mandatory labeling is not going to stop genetically engineered alfalfa. It's not going to stop contamination. If genetically engineered alfalfa is introduced, you can't label that on the grocery store shelves, and a label's not going to stop that contamination. So we have a small window of time to mobilize our few resources, and I would suggest that we do that in a more fulsome conversation with people about the problems of genetic engineering in the field, in food, and that a label fundamentally does not allow for everyone to have a choice because of literacy issues and others. It's not, if we're looking for justice in our food system, that there's some other fundamental issues around corporate control here. And this is what CBAN's message is fundamentally that we can stop genetically engineered organisms, GMOs in Canada, and that we need to do this. We need to stop and we need to evaluate. After 17 years of these GM crops, 17 years, that calls for an end to the experiment, not a labeling of an experiment that's failing and destructive. And we happen to have this opportunity right now. If some of you are interested in donating to CBAN, there is a donor who will match donations until November 30th. So I mention that because I'm supposed to mention it, but it accompanies the fact that actually, we need to draw a line here, and it needs to be really clear and consistent for everybody.